Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are tackling a really tough question. Why has the war in Ukraine become such a brutal, seemingly unending stalemate? We're going to break down the conflict using analysis from the Geopolitical Economy report to really understand all the complex forces that are keeping this war locked in place. Okay, to get a real handle on this, you gotta zoom out. This war is not happening in a vacuum. You know, the analysts in our source material, they frame this as a truly pivotal moment in history. It's part of a massive global power shift, what some are even calling the end of 500 years of Western domination. The old rules are changing, and this conflict, well, it's one of the most violent symptoms of that change. All right, here's how we're going to break this all down. We're going to start with the chaotic diplomacy, then zoom right in on the core territorial dispute that's really fueling the fight. From there, we'll look at Europe's role, the bigger global power shifts, the brutal reality on the ground, and finally, what the potential and pretty grim fates for Ukraine might look like. Okay, first up, let's talk about the diplomatic side of things. The source material we're looking at really characterizes Donald Trump's approach as, well, a whirlwind of contradictions. It's driven a lot more by performance than by actual policy. I mean, his actions have been a total roller coaster. One minute he's suggesting a sit-down with Putin, the next he's slapping heavy sanctions on Russian companies. He offers advanced weapons to Ukraine, then poof, the idea is gone after just one phone call. The source suggests this isn't really about a coherent strategy, but more about looking like the ultimate dealmaker, constantly bouncing between the hawkish and the dovish voices inside his own administration. And this quote from an analyst in our source, borrowing from Macbeth, it just perfectly captures the core critique, right? That this style of diplomacy is less about solving a massively complex international crisis and more about playing to the folks back home, and maybe, just maybe, the Nobel Peace Prize Committee. It's a lot of sound and fury, but does it actually lead to peace? That's the big question. But okay, take away all that diplomatic drama, and what are you left with? You're left with the real, hardened, immovable core of this conflict. The fight for territory, specifically for the Donbas region. And this right here illustrates the fundamental problem. It's a gap you just can't seem to bridge. For Russia, taking the entire Donbas is completely non-negotiable. It's their stated reason for the war, and it's essential for them to claim any kind of victory. But for Ukraine, after all the incredible sacrifice, voluntarily giving up that same land, it's just politically impossible. Analysts think in order to withdraw would probably cause an army mutiny, maybe even the collapse of the state itself. Neither side can back down without facing a crisis at home. So let's pull the camera back again, way out, to that bigger picture. Because the stalemate in Ukraine isn't just a regional fight. It's a flashpoint in a massive restructuring of the entire global order. The source highlights that leaders in Russia and China, they see the dawn of what they call a polycentric or multipolar world. What does that even mean? Well, basically, it's a world with lots of different centers of power, where the era of a single superpower calling all the shots is seen as over. And this new vision, it's built on the idea that the old order has failed, creating what are identified here as 4 key deficits in the world: a lack of peace, development, security, and governance. The proposal is for a new system based on every nation's sovereignty and mutual respect, and that's a profound challenge to the way things have been since the Cold War ended. Now, this is where things get really interesting. Let's talk about Europe's role in all this. Our source material frames it not just as a reaction to Russia, but also as a strategy for dealing with Europe's own problems at home. So, the analysis brings up a pretty controversial idea, that for European governments, this war serves a crucial internal purpose. The argument is that the conflict provides political cover to push through domestic policies that would otherwise be really unpopular, things like huge increases in military spending, and it lets them paint any domestic opposition as a threat to national unity in a time of war. And this creates this huge paradox in the public story, one that analysts find just baffling. On the one hand, Russia is painted as super weak, its economy about to collapse, which makes victory seem totally possible. But on the other hand, it's portrayed as this massive existential threat, so strong that if it's not beaten in Ukraine, it'll just roll right over NATO. This contradiction, the source argues, is exactly what you need to justify a state of permanent conflict. Okay, we've been up in the clouds with geopolitics. Let's get back down to the mud and the steel on the battlefield itself. Because here, the conflict has settled into a grim, slow-motion war of attrition, and it's being defined by some very new realities. So, Here's the crucial point. The nature of modern warfare has fundamentally changed. You got this combination of constant drone surveillance from above and these vast, dense minefields on the ground. Together, they've made big troop advances almost impossible. Anytime forces start to gather, they're spotted and hit fast. The result is this slow, grinding fight where taking a single small town can take over a year of just brutal, costly effort. And man, if you want a perfect example of the brutal uncertainty here, just look at the casualty figures. The estimates are all over the map. One analyst cited in the source throws out this incredible number, over 1 million Ukrainian dead. Another analyst immediately calls that a gross exaggeration. Then you have older data from the BBC with much lower, though still devastating, numbers. This huge disagreement just shows you how thick the fog of war really is and how hard it is to get a clear picture of anything.
So all of this has led to a new dominant idea on the battlefield, captured perfectly by this quote. The thinking now is that if Ukraine can just hold its lines, if it can prevent a collapse, it effectively wins by denying Russia a clear-cut victory. The hope is that this incredibly costly stalemate might eventually force Moscow to a peace deal that falls way short of what it originally wanted.
So, you've got this deadlocked front, these political goals that just can't meet in the middle. Where on earth does this all go from here? The source lays out 3 potential long-term outcomes. And let me tell you, none of them look like a clean victory for anyone. First, there's the Cyprus model. Basically, a frozen conflict. The shooting stops, but the core issue over territory is never actually resolved. Second, you have the Kashmir model, which is the nightmare scenario. A never-ending, low-level war that just flares up into full-scale fighting every so often. And third, there's the collapse model, where the war of attrition just goes on until one side, and the source suggests it would likely be Ukraine, simply runs out of people, resources, and outside support. And that leaves us with this final, truly chilling question. As this brutal stalemate grinds on, with no clear end in sight, the pressure just keeps building. Does the greatest danger now come not from the stalemate itself, but from a desperate gamble or a fatal miscalculation that could escalate this regional tragedy into a direct and far, far more dangerous global conflict?